Okay, in this lesson we'll look at creating a tune or a motif for our piece. A good starting point for this is the pentatonic scale. This pentatonic scale is for the key of C major or A minor. So as long as your piece is in one of these keys, this scale will be perfect. One thing to remember about the pentatonic scale is that it generally creates very happy themes. So if you need a tune that needs more tension, you'll need to come in and out of this note sequence. But nevertheless, it's still a good starting point. What I'd like to do now is pause the video and spend some time experimenting with coming up a simple tune from this scale. Try to make these tunes as simple as possible, as we're going to develop this further in the next part. Okay, here's the motif that I've come up with. As you can see, it's very simple, consisting of only 3 notes, which are 2 quavers and a crotchet. Here's what it sounds like. The next thing to look at is how to invert this motif. Here are the inversions that I've come up with. It's important to remember that the more notes you use for your motif, the more complex your inversions will become. I recommend limiting yourself to 5 notes. So here's my original, and here's my first inversion. This is called an upside down inversion. As you can see, this first note is no longer an E, but it takes the place of this last note, which was the D. And once again, you can also see that this last note is now taking the place of this first note. Basically, just turn upside down. After that, you can see I have a back to front inversion, where the last note is now the first note and vice versa. After that, I have an upside down and back to front. After that, I have a downward motion, so I've come away from my note pattern now, and I've just created a downward scale using the rhythm, 2 quavers and a crotchet. Next one, I've done an upward scale, 2 quavers and crotchet, keeping that rhythm exactly the same, coming away from the note pattern. And then finally, my last inversion, or my last idea I should say, is doubling the notes. So each quaver is now 2 quavers, and the crotchet is also 2. So here's what all the inversions sound like. Okay, I'd like to pause the video now and have a go at creating your own inversions. The reason we're doing this is because in the next part we're going to start putting these inversions together to create longer, more developed ideas. Okay, the next thing we need to look at is developing and combining these ideas. In my piece up here, I've already gone ahead and done this. So here is my first one. I'm using the original statement of the motif, and then a bar later I'm using this downward scale. I wanted to keep this very simple. The piece Syntel that I'm working on doesn't need masses of movement, but I just wanted to bring in this original idea, this motif. Let me just solo that and press play. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go at combining multiple ideas and see what you come up with. Okay, the final part of this lesson is separating up your tune onto multiple layers using different instruments and panning. This will help you create interest, depth, and give the representation of a call and response pattern between the instruments, even though they're actually playing all the same tune. In my piece, I've used the flute and the glockenspiel. I've still got more work to do on developing this, but here's what it sounds like so far. So, motif part 1, you'll see I've got the panning slightly left. Motif part 2, panning is slightly right. The instruments I'm using, motif part 1, I'm using a flute, and motif part 2, I'm using a glockenspiel. Motif part 1 stayed the same. I've taken this first initial idea, and then I've used this downward scale. In the part 2, I'm using this kind of call and response. So I'm now using 4 quavers, just using a little pattern of original statement, down, up, down. So it's original, down, up, down. Let's have a look at what that sounds like. Okay, and here it is in the piece. Other things that you can do, I mean, the list is endless, but other things you can do is make the notes longer, make it even slower. So what I've done is I've taken this first initial down, up, down, but the last note, rather than just stopping on a quaver, I've just extended it to the end of the bar. So have a listen to this last section I put in. Okay, lots of ideas, lots of things you can do. Your mission now is to work on this, build up a suitable tune. Remember, keep it simple, it doesn't have to be complex. Let's see what you come up with.